Thank you so much. I think my colleagues have made it clear that we have a corrupt Supreme Court, so I'm going to spare you on that part. I do want to make sure that people understand how confused I've been in this hearing. Number one, it sounds like my colleagues from across the aisle are somehow believing in climate change now, so I'm excited to hear this, because I thought it was a farce and a hoax, but we talking about renewables and we care, so that's really good that we got that going. Interestingly enough, I had the privilege, or maybe not so much, when I started my legal career, my first job was to actually defend a large pharmaceutical company. I hated practicing law. I decided I needed to do something else, and so most people only know me for doing civil rights or criminal defense or the things that really matter to individual people versus doing the bidding of large corporations. And so I want to walk through this just a little bit and lawyer out a little bit, because I'm going to tell you from the onset, one of my issues with this whole concept is, number one, we have a little thing called attorney-client privilege, and in my opinion, we are starting to get dangerously close to piercing that privilege, that relationship between the attorney and their client, when you start saying, well, how are you funding this and things like that? Because let's say I'm using my own money, fine. Let's say I'm using a third party. Why is it that the opposition has the right to know what my strategy is, or why it is, or who's helping me to do what? That's number one. Number two, if we are complaining about frivolous lawsuits, we have a thing called sanctions. For the lawyers here, has anyone heard of sanctions? Please raise your hand. Okay, thank you. Have we heard of a thing called a 12B6 motion? This is for anyone that practices on the federal level, but it is a motion to dismiss that most defendants, unless you want to have a problem with your bar card, most defendants file a 12B6 motion to dismiss for failure to state a claim very early on if there is a problem with litigation. Is that true or not? Can I get a raised hand? Okay, all right, Ms. Clark agrees with me. So part of my issue is that we have certain mechanisms in place already, and the only thing that we've talked about, or seemingly one of the things that's been an overarching theme today, has been about the client advertisement, talking about the commercials. But the cost of actually prosecuting a case is more than a commercial. In fact, a commercial is not necessarily required from my experience. I've only been out of practice for a little less than a year now. But has anyone ever been involved in a lawsuit, say Ms. Wine, where maybe an expert report was required?
Congresswoman, in most of the cases,
Especially mass tort.
expert reports are required.
Okay.
In addition, in all mass tort cases today, millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars are spent on advertising.
I hear you, because you have made that clear, but the reality is that people use third-party financing for things other than just advertising. And let me be clear, it's not just going to affect Johnson & Johnson, who last time I checked is doing okay on their profits, but as I switch over and talk about my life as a civil rights lawyer, a lot of times you have a family who has someone who has potentially been killed by law enforcement. And a lot of times, we don't necessarily have the money to front for all the experts that are required just for you to have your day in court. And so this has been couched as something frivolous, but if we want to be honest about it, it's my understanding that there was an $18.8 million verdict that was just handed down by a jury to a man in California against your corporation as it relates to talcum powder. That was just in July, I believe, of this year. And so this idea that the third-party financing or seeing something on TV somehow then validates the claim. They still have to go through court. They still have to have expert reports. They still have to have attorneys. They still have to make sure that they take depositions. They still have to go through the entire discovery process. And a lot of times, at least in my experience, when it comes to defense, you end up with so much paperwork that you may end up needing a doc review team to go through all of the paperwork that is thrown on a simple plaintiff that may not have a large law firm that is behind them.
And so what we are doing is saying if you have money, then you can access justice in this country. But if you don't have money, oh well, because we want to make sure that we know where your money is coming from, and that's just not fair. And the one thing that justice is supposed to be, that unfortunately we still are trying to get to in this country, justice is supposed to be blind. And unfortunately, I believe that this is the wrong venue. This is also the wrong body, because we do have bar associations. We do have courts and judges that have the ability to issue sanctions, that have the ability to dismiss cases. And if we have some issues with the qualifications of judges, which I do, we know who we need to talk to about that as well. With that, I will yield.